Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're setting out on a journey to uncover a massively powerful, yet honestly astonishingly overlooked ancient civilization. We're heading just south of Egypt, along the Nile River, into what is mostly modern-day Sudan, to explore the incredible epic of the Kingdom of Kush. This was a sophisticated, wealthy, and militarily formidable African powerhouse that stood toe-to-toe with the greatest empires of antiquity. Okay, let's dive into this, because I actually want to start by shattering a preconception that, well, pretty much everyone has. Who built the most pyramids in ancient Africa? If you're like most people, your brain is instantly yelling Egypt, right? But history loves a good twist.
The actual answer is the Kingdom of Kush. Seriously, they built at least 255 pyramids. To put that into perspective, that is essentially double the number of pyramids found in Egypt. Double! These pyramids pepper the deserts of Sudan today, acting as towering monuments to a civilization that absolutely refused to live in anyone's shadow.
And look, we're not just talking about a brief flash in the pan here. Kushite history is this unbroken chronological epic spanning thousands of years. It starts way back around 2500 BC with the establishment of Kerma, evolves through incredible highs, like literally conquering Egypt in the 8th century BC, and lasts all the way until 350 AD. This was a civilization that evolved, adapted, and thrived entirely on its own terms for millennia. Section 1. The Ancient Kerma Culture.
So, by 2500 BC, Kerma was a thriving, heavily fortified African city-state, and just look at the sheer scale of their architecture. They built these massive mud brick religious monuments called tefufas. The western tefufa, which was essentially the heart of the city, stood a staggering 18 meters, or about 59 feet tall. Imagine standing next to a solid mud brick structure the size of a modern 5-story building. This brilliantly illustrates that early Kush wasn't just a collection of small villages. It was a highly advanced, centralized urban society with some serious engineering capabilities.
But it wasn't just about massive buildings. The people of Kerma were incredibly wealthy. They controlled a massive stretch of the Nile Valley, from the first all the way to the fourth cataracts. That's an area just as large as Egypt itself. They absolutely dominated the trade routes, dealing in highly prized luxury goods like gold, ivory, incense, and ebony. In fact, the region was so rich in gold that many scholars actually believe the name Nubia derives from the ancient Egyptian word for gold, which is nub. This immense wealth made them a powerful trading partner, but also, as you can imagine, a very dangerous rival to the neighboring Egyptians. Section 2. Conquering Ancient Egypt. As the centuries passed, the dynamic between Egypt and Kush, it fluctuated. Sometimes they traded, sometimes they fought. But by the 8th century BC, the Egyptian New Kingdom had completely collapsed. Egypt was fractured, weakened by internal instability, and dealing with foreign invasions from the Libyans. Down south, however, Kush had regained its independence, moved its capital to the city of Napata, and was rapidly expanding northward, driven by a powerful military and really ambitious leaders like King Kashta. Now, King Kashta started the campaign, but it was his son, King Paye, who actually finished the job. Around 744 BCE, Paye swept north and completely conquered Egypt. I mean, Kush entirely flipped the script here. The former occupied territory suddenly became the occupier. And what's really fascinating is that Paye established the 25th dynasty and adopted the full pharaonic regalia, embracing Egyptian traditions, but he proudly maintained his distinct Nubian origins. He didn't try to erase who he was. He synthesized the two cultures. Section 3. The 25th dynasty. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this quote humanizes one of their absolute greatest rulers, King Taharqa. This ancient text reveals that upon becoming king, Taharqa immediately remembered the ruined state of a temple he'd seen as a young prince, and he set out to fix it. He wasn't just some conquering warlord, right? He was a deeply religious man dedicated to restoration. Under rulers like Taharqa, the 25th dynasty sparked what was essentially a true Egyptian renaissance. The Kushites became the fierce protectors of Nile Valley culture. They were restoring ancient temples that had fallen into ruin, reviving ancient religious texts, and building magnificent new monuments across both Kush and Egypt. They even went to war against the terrifying Assyrian Empire to protect their lands and their allies in Jerusalem. They were literally holding the line for their entire civilization. Section 4. The move to Meroe. Eventually, the sheer military machine of the Assyrians pushed the Kushites out of Egypt. Let's move to and see how this builds a new chapter across their timeline. We've covered the Kerma state and the Napatan phase where they conquered Egypt.
Now we enter the Meroic phase, from 300 BC to 350 AD, where they shifted their capital far south to Meroe, putting a nice, safe distance between themselves and the empires of the Mediterranean. Meroe was an absolute powerhouse of industry and culture. They perfected iron-working techniques that rivaled literally anything else in the ancient world, basically turning Meroe into a massive industrial hub. And they really started to culturally distance themselves from Egypt at this point. They developed their own unique Meroitic alphabet, which, by the way, scholars today are still trying to fully decipher. Plus, they elevated indigenous Nubian deities like the fierce lion-headed god of war, Apademak. They were forging a fiercely independent cultural identity. Section 5. Architecture and female rulers. Unlike a lot of their ancient contemporaries, the Kingdom of Kush featured uniquely high levels of female participation in politics. They were led by the Candaces, these fiercely powerful ruling queens. The mother of the king always had immense influence over succession, but eventually these women stepped up to rule as sovereign queens in their own right. They were builders, priestesses, and brilliant military tacticians who commanded absolute authority. And of course, we have to talk about the architecture. Comparing their pyramids, you can clearly see the Kushite style was entirely their own thing. While Old Kingdom Egyptian pyramids were giant with these wide bases, the Kushite pyramids at sites like Meroe and Nuri were smaller with much steeper, dramatic sides, and they were built directly over subterranean rock-cut tombs. They also utilized this ingenious architectural invention called the Nubian vault, a super strong barrel-vaulted ceiling made of brick that allowed them to build distinct palaces and multi-story homes without even needing large wooden beams. Section 6. The Fall and Legacy. Even in their later centuries, the Kushites were just incredibly formidable. When the Roman Empire conquered Egypt, they naturally looked south toward Kush. But the Kushites? They pushed back hard. Around 20 BC, they engaged in a fierce war against the Romans. And get this, they even deployed war elephants in battle. They fought the armies of Emperor Augustus to a total standstill, ultimately negotiating a peace treaty that officially drew the southern border of Roman Egypt at Aswan. They literally stopped the expansion of the Roman Empire in Africa. So the crucial point is this massive, undeniable legacy. We're talking about the earliest urbanized society in sub-Saharan Africa. They built over 250 pyramids. They conquered Egypt and ruled as the 25th dynasty. They were pioneers in ironworking, created their own written script, and successfully fought off ancient superpowers like the Assyrians and the Romans. They survived and thrived until they were finally overcome by the kingdom of Axum around 350 AD. Which brings us to our final and really, I think, most provocative thought. For centuries, history has relegated Kush to being, well, just a footnote to Egypt. But when we actually look at the evidence, the soaring dufufas, the steep pyramids, the fierce Candaces, and the brilliant ironworkers of Meroe, how does that change our understanding of antiquity? Recognizing this African powerhouse forces us to completely rewrite the map of the ancient world, proving once and for all that greatness, innovation, and empire thrived deeply along the southern Nile. Thank you so much for joining me to explore the phenomenal Kingdom of Kush.